Members of the jury, I understand you have a verdict. Members of the jury, I will now read the verdicts as they will appear in the permanent records of the 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota, County of Hennepin, District Court, 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota Plaintiff versus Derek Michael Chauvin, Defendant. Verdict, count 1. Court file number 27, CR 20-12646. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April, 2021 at 1:44 p.m. Signed, juror foreperson, juror number 19. Same caption, verdict count 2. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 2, third-degree murder, perpetrating an eminently dangerous act, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April, 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Signed by jury foreperson, juror number 19. Same caption, verdict count 3. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April, 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Jury foreperson 019. Members of the jury, I'm now going to ask you individually if these are your true and correct verdicts. Please respond yes or no. Juror number 2, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 9, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 19, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 27, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 44, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 52, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 55, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 79, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 85, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 89, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 91, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 92, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Are these your verdicts, so say you one, so say you all?
Yes.
Yes.
Members of the jury, I find that the verdicts as read reflect the will of the jury and will be filed accordingly. I have to thank you on behalf of the people of the state of Minnesota for not only jury service, but heavy-duty jury service. What I'm going to ask you to do now is to follow the deputy back into your usual room, and I will join you in a few minutes to answer questions and to advise you further. So all rise for the jury. All right, be seated. With the guilty verdicts returned, we're going to have Blakely, you may file a written argument as to Blakely factors within 1 week. The court will issue findings on the Blakely factors, the factual findings, 1 week after that. We'll order a PSI immediately returnable in 4 weeks. And we will also have a briefing on, after you get the PSI, 6 weeks from now, and then 8 weeks from now, we will have sentencing. We'll get you the exact dates in a scheduling order. Is there a motion on behalf of the state?
The state would move to have the court revoke the defendant's bail and remand him into custody pending sentencing.
Bail is revoked, bond is discharged, and the defendant is remanded to the custody of the Hennepin County Sheriff. Anything further?
Oh,
All right, thank you.
Derek Chauvin, convicted on all 3 counts, guilty of second.
All right. My name is Ben Burgess. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined today by 2 of our favorite returning guests, Pascal Robert and Jason Myles from the This Is Revolution podcast. And we are here to talk a little bit about both that verdict and some broader issues about ongoing political struggles over police reform and how this fits into how the left is thinking more broadly about race and class and criminal justice and related issues. I should say we would have done this stream. Well, I don't know. Maybe these guys wouldn't have been able to come anyway, so it's better that we didn't. But we would have done this stream yesterday, but I was still in the car until late last night. I was in Florida to debate Gene Epstein at the Villages, which is a very strange place. Grist
Were you near Pascal? Were you in Miami area?
No. Miami is, like Miami, like the Villages is like suburban Orlando. It's a big hike from there to Miami. I actually did live in Miami for 6.5 years. I went to graduate school there, and I was
graduate school in Miami. Where'd you go to school?
Yeah.
Do it. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
You got your doctorate from University of Miami?
Yep.
I did not know that, Ben. Oh, so you suffered the consequential horror of living in South Florida for quite a long time.
Quite a long time, yeah. 6.5 years all told. A little bit of that was
I
after
did not
I
know that you got your PhD from University of Miami, man.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, we have a lot to talk about.
Fair enough. Yeah, I was, it was a much less politically active period of my life, but I did get kicked out of a Cuban restaurant once for I mean, I was being an asshole, but I had a.
It was like the scene in Do the Right Thing. It was like, why is there no white people on the wall?
No, he was like, how come Che's not on the wall? How come Fidel's not on the wall?
Yeah, no, it was exactly. It was more like that. I was meeting a friend there, but I was wearing my in 2007 in Miami. I was wearing around a Hugo Chavez is my president T-shirt. So it's probably lucky that that's the worst thing that happened to me, because of that. But yeah, so I did live there for quite some time. But yeah, the Villages is in suburban Orlando. It is this giant, sprawling, planned community. You have to be over 55 to live
There's
there.
A lot of that there. I used to actually own property outside of Kissimmee. In the Orlando area, there's a lot of those over 55.
Yeah.
Gated. Was it gated too?
Yeah, exactly. So it's the Villages. I think there are like 80 different like sort of gated sub communities, and there are like tons of people there who their like main form of transportation is golf carts. So I saw more golf carts over the weekend than the previous 41 years of my life. It's a very strange place, and it was like, 80%, like it was like 70 or 80% voted for Trump there, and I was there at so there's something called the Soho Forum, which is a debate series that, as the name suggests, was always in New York, but they relocated it down there a little while ago, and but it's like very. Like the people who run it, are libertarians, and Epstein is a libertarian, and I was down there to debate him. So, as you can imagine, out of like 200 and change people in that audience, there were like maybe like 10 guys who were, yeah,
rooting
man,
for you.
How did it go?
Pretty well, I think. So he'd done similar debates, I think. So about 2 years ago with Bhaskar, and I think very early 2020 with Richard Wolff, and Wolff, who no shade on Richard Wolff, I'm he's been on the show, I like him a lot, but he's a busy guy, and I think that he did not watch the Bhaskar one before he did his, so all of which is just to say that I think I was at an advantage because I watched both Boscar's and Wolf's, beforehand, and I kind of knew what Gene
You
was
was
going to
watching
say.
game film.
Yeah, exactly. It's like reviewing,
Breaking
it's like
down
one of
game
those
film.
it's like one of those high schools in Texas where the college, like the football players can get class credit for reviewing game tape. Like it's yeah. So I feel I feel pretty I feel pretty decent about it. We'll see what people think when it goes up on YouTube, which I think is going to happen in like on Monday. They said like a week to 10 days. Somehow like they send the film to Reason, and Reason puts it up on their YouTube channel. But my at least I did manage to make even that deeply unsympathetic audience laugh a couple times. So one of them was because so I'd mentioned that one of my favorite just random trivia things that when Noam Chomsky debated Michel Foucault in 1971, Foucault successfully requested to be paid in hash. And so supposedly, between that, or supposedly he did, allegedly. And he had, when he and his friends would bust it out, from thereafter until it was all smoked, they'd like make a, big deal of like kind of snickering that they were smoking the Chomsky hash. And so I said, of course, as a good, statist, anti-libertarian, I asked, I didn't get my honorarium, some barter system thing like that. I got it in, good old, government-backed fiat currency, but I was going to spend some of it on buying a nice bottle of whiskey. Of course, I probably wouldn't call it the Epstein whiskey because, Gene Epstein is not currently the world's most famous Epstein, but
Exactly.
so that, that got a little, but in any case, no, it was fun. I mean, it was a good thing to, it was a good thing to do. And, they were, they were good natured about it. And, and it was a good, like surreal, weird thing to be in the, villages for a couple days. But I mean, it's obviously, upper income, older white Republicans. I mean, that's pretty much who lives there, but
There's definitely some parts of Florida like that.
yeah, but yeah.
Lower income Republicans in Florida too.
Yeah, well, that's
Definitely
also
parts
true.
of Florida like that.
One of the things that I always thought was the most interesting about the election last fall is that Donald Trump won the state, but the $15 minimum wage actually won by more than Trump did, which suggests that that there's some overlap there. But in any case, I was on the road. I was on my way back to Michigan yesterday when the news broke about Derek Chauvin. Got back into East Lansing late last night. I actually still don't have the computer I normally use for this, which is why my image probably looks a little bit different, but in any case, yep, Kat's got a lot to say. Yeah, we should talk about this because I think there's a lot to talk about. I do think that this is one of the cases where, as happens from time to time, when some of the best commentary was from The Onion, where their headline was "Depressed Police Officer Reminds Self That Chauvin Verdict Not Representative of System at Large." So as you scroll down, says Minneapolis shaken by guilty verdict delivered in the trial of Derek Chauvin. Local police officer Edward Margolin took comfort Tuesday by remembering this outcome wasn't representative of the system at large. Moments like this can be tough, but it helps to take a step back and remember that this is the exception that proves the rule, said Margolin, confirming that despite the conviction, he still believed in the justice system's fundamental purpose of exonerating police officers. Which does sum a lot of it up. I think unfortunately that this is something, and we can talk about whether it's entirely politically healthy, the way that we focus on and process these spectacles. I know Pascal's gonna have stuff to say about that, but I think that it is also I mean it's something that I think a lot of people are determined to kind of miss a pretty obvious point about, right? Since I'll sometimes hear things, see above, right? I spend a lot of time talking to people I disagree with. I sometimes hear things like, oh, well, so few people, when you break down the statistics, are really killed by cops, that it's a very, it's a relatively minor problem. And I think, of course, it's true that as causes of death go, it's very low. I think it's also representative of much bigger pattern of abusive behavior. But it's also true that I think that a public official openly killing someone and getting away with it, which is what usually happens, is pretty bad, right? I mean, like, I think there's a democracy problem there, when that can just happen. Without meaningful consequences, and so I know. So I think that this is I mean, from my perspective at least, right? I'll throw to you guys, but I mean, I think that it is good news as far as it goes. This is I do think that I do see some tension in the views of some people about this because I do see some like online lefties who, 6 days out of the week are prison abolitionists and 1 day of the week, want
Pro prison.
Yeah.
That's I have an issue with that too, because I always see that same sentiment gets reversed when the situation is different, right? Recently, not too far from where I grew up in a city called Richmond, California, there was a situation in one of the homeless hotels where and we talked about this before on the show, Pascal, where there was a couple that had a child that was about 6 weeks old, I believe, and they took the child to the hospital, was having breathing problems, and the doctor finds out, well, this kid's malnourished, and the couple got arrested for pretty much murdering their newborn. The kid died on the site. And when the cops came in to check out the room, they found meth paraphernalia, and the couple gets arrested for murder. And there was a lot of the same sentiment that I see with this Chauvin trial, with these parents. So as someone that I wouldn't call myself an abolitionist, but I do respect a lot of that point of view, because when you work with certain populations, you can't just lock up bad behavior or things that you don't like all the time, which is what I think we see with a lot of this policing. A lot of it is policing poverty. And that's why I get kind of frustrated when I hear things like, well, if we just had social workers there, or if you just took their guns away, I'm like, well, now you're just trying to get a nicer face on the policing of poverty.
Yeah, and I think that is a really important point because, I mean, I'm a little conflicted about this because I think that when people talk about defunding the police, I think I agree with 99% of what they're saying. But the thing that I feel a little uneasy about is that sometimes it is portrayed as if, you could sort of keep everything else constant and shift around some municipal budget lines, and you get a big improvement in all of this. And I think it is worth remembering that if you look back, I mean, I'm thinking about some stuff that I think I've seen from like Cedric Johnson, for example, writing about this, that like, if you look back, sort of in the 70s, maybe, when a lot of this turn towards more aggressive policing and carceral regime, happened, it was, like sometimes there's some slightly overstated mythology on the left where we'll say, oh, there really wasn't that much bad crime going on then, it was really, it's like we'll sort of just entirely kind of blame it on certain kinds of cultural shifts that everybody just kind of became a lot more racist suddenly or something like that. And I think that the more accurate thing to say about that is that for elites at the time, in a bipartisan way, it was much cheaper in every sense to tackle a lot of the social ills that come from poverty with more aggressive policing and incarceration than to tackle them by expanding, the Great Society and the welfare state. And the fact is that, like, above and beyond anything else, even like the NYPD, it's one of the most bloated, police departments in the world. But like you could eliminate the budget of the NYPD, and the amount of money that people think that would free up is a lot less than it actually would. I mean, like you couldn't even. I mean, I think you could eliminate I did some like back of the envelope math for an article for Jacobin last summer about this, and I think you could eliminate the entire budget of the NYPD, and you wouldn't even equalize like educational spending between the richest and the poorest school districts in New York, and certainly you wouldn't have a lot left over for these counselors and social workers. And again, you need like I think you say with the counselors and the social workers. I don't entirely disagree with the underlying point. Like, I think it is. There are a lot.
How is it? This is my thing. How is it going to look in real time? And being someone that's actually worked in an environment where I was told to call counselors, where I actually saw the counselors come out, and this isn't meant to be some sort of disrespectful comment on the counselors. It's just more how systems run. Usually, these things are farmed out to third parties.
Oh.
And they're going to not want to spend any money because all this shit is massively underfunded. So you're talking about kids generally coming out, trying to talk to adults that have had drug problems and chronic homelessness longer than these people have been on the planet. I'm not saying they're entirely inept, but there's a bit of a problem with that. And I don't know if I've told this story on the show. I told it on another show, or even it was our show. I can't remember. We had a situation where I was told to call someone's mental health response team. And the response that I got was a woman was being very unruly. And she said she had a knife. I didn't see one, but she was starting fights, and you can only do so much, right? So I'm like, did I call the mental health team? Perfect. Because I don't want to call the police and say there's a woman here with a knife. And so the mental health team says, we're not coming. It's 4:00 on a Friday. We're not coming. Call the cops. That's what they said. They said, call the cops.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, like, I think there are a couple things here. One is, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, right? Like, counselors hired by who? Social workers hired by who, right? Like, are these direct city employees? Are these contractors? Is going to be the case very often, especially because, like, we're not actually talking about very much money when we're shifting around, those budget lines. And then, so that's definitely one issue. And then the other issue is, again, I mean, like, this is like, I think maybe the most like simple-minded possible leftist point about this, but it's also, correct that you like really the alternative to, and there are tons of like specific reforms we could talk about that I think would help a lot, right? But like in broad brush, the alternative to managing the social ills created by poverty, with aggressive policing and incarceration, shouldn't be let's find like a softer way for the state to manage these things. It should be let's do something about the poverty.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's never the case, which is highly frustrating because I'm not saying this because I don't think we shouldn't have these types of people, but I think when people make that ask and make that demand, you really have to understand that when you go walk away and say, okay, we got the social workers, they're going to be an underfunded arm of law enforcement, an unarmed arm of law enforcement. So where you might not have the kneeling on necks and unnecessary shootings, you're still going to have people policing poverty. Just because you're an authority figure to a lot of these cats, they don't want to fucking listen to you. Nobody cares if you have a gun or not. You're still the man that's telling them that their life is wrong, a life that's something you can't avoid. I'm gonna shut up now. I'm talking too much of Pascal's. He needs to talk.
I think the most important book that can be read to talk about the phenomenon of the carceral state, punitive policing in the post-civil rights era, its consequences, contrary to what people will believe, is not the new Jim Crow, but is Punishing the Poor, the Neoliberal Government of Social Insecurity by Louis Wacant, which basically is a very, very effective materialist analysis of what exactly is the function of policing in the carceral state. I think that one of the problems I have with all of these reformist policies, abolish the police, defund the police, none of them are rooted in the political economy of what is the function of policing in the United States, what is the nature of the political economy of poverty in most of the cities in which more people are housed, what is the class dynamics of the individuals who are incarcerated, and what exactly does it mean when you have an economic paradigm in American society that is making people redundant, surplus, reserve army of labor, and the function of police is to discipline the poor and the reserve army of labor and prepare them to be housed and socially exiled in prison. That is a function of policing in a capitalist society generally. And one of the reasons why policing has increased in its brutality and its funding through military weaponry in the last 50 years is that the shift in the economy that took place, particularly in the Nixon administration, moving away from the gold standard, the Bretton Woods Accords, the shifting nature of the way in which capitalism was reorganizing itself, and the way in which social, state-sponsored financing of government largesse, vis-a-vis the New Deal and Great Society, was completely out of play with the way in which America was economically organizing itself. There was a basic understanding for a variety of reasons. One, as was documented by the Nixon administration aide, I forgot his actual name, who quoted that, yes, there was a political motivation behind mass incarceration, in that Nixon wanted to use a tool to neutralize the radical, rebellious, insurrectionist forces of the Black radical left, as well as the white left that was challenging the Vietnam War. So yes, that's definitely a part of it as well. But part of the problem of minimizing and racializing the nature of mass incarceration, which is profoundly racialized, but capitalism in America is racialized for the purpose that we talk about often on This Is Revolution, and I think that Ben would have no question, is that capitalism is racialized to disproportionately render Black and brown people to the surplus, redundant reserve army and labor to manufacture in the consciousness of the majority who is white. The system does not fail for them. What Milton Friedman called the natural rate of unemployment, or what is called the NAIRU, basically arguing that in order to temper down inflation, you cannot have full employment in capitalism. You must have unemployment. And if you must have unemployment, then there's going to be social dislocation and dysfunctionality that comes across with the aspects or elements or members of society that are rendered to that reserve army of labor. That's why we have this thing in American economics called the NAIRU, which I forgot the full acronym, but it's basically a consistent measurement of what the unemployment rate has to be in American society to avoid inflation. And one of the constant realities now, surprisingly, if Karl Marx agrees that you have to have a reserve army of labor, and the most vicious neoliberal capitalist, Milton Friedman, agrees that, oh my God, we have to have a national rate of unemployment. Oh my God, does that mean that Milton Friedman is a secret Marxist who agrees that we can't have full employment in America? No, what it means is that there's actually some aspects of Marxism that is true economically. And what is actually the reality, and I don't think there's any economist who would deny this, whether he's in neoliberalism. As a matter of fact, there was an article in the Center for American Progress that literally stated recently, I Googled it and looked it up, that the Black-white unemployment gap, not income gap, but unemployed gap, unemployment gap is built into the system. That Black unemployment has been at least twice and almost twice the rate of white unemployment, almost consistently for 50, at least in the post-civil rights era, for at least 50 years, probably going back to above that. So again, all of the social dislocation and quote unquote pathology that Black conservatives like to blame on poor Black people is part of the social consequence of dislocation, of rendering disproportionately Black people to the reserve army of labor and having them to be forced to have to be disciplined in the last 50 years in what is an increasingly precarious economic system in which they have to be crushed in the skull and in the body by the cops to protect the fact that jobs, labor, economics, and wages are becoming more precarious for poor and working class people.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of different threads of that are worth that are worth picking up. The Milton Friedman thing doesn't surprise me. In fact, I think it's like often astonishing how honest ruling class economic commentators are about this stuff, especially when they're I know this is going to sort of veer into sounding like sort of vulgar Marxist thing, like I think they're smoke-filled rooms or something, but like really, like, especially when they're talking to each other, right? Like that when it's not for it's not for mass consumption, they're just kind of chatting among themselves. Although I think that there's stuff that lets the cat out of the bag that we've seen a lot lately, like this thing, especially I feel like in the last few weeks with the obsessive right-wing talking point is this thing about how all these businesses are understaffed because they just can't compete with unemployment benefits, which is above and beyond everything else that's factually or morally wrong with that, is a astonishingly honest admission that you don't actually expect people to show up to lower end working class jobs of their own free will. You think that you need them to be economically desperate enough that they have to.
Mm-hmm.
Yet the free marketeers won't say, well, since the demand for labor is low to fill the jobs, or doesn't that mean that labor has to increase the wages to satisfy the lack of actual demand? Isn't that the logical capitalist principle? Is that if you don't have, if you don't have a supply of labor because they won't work at the low price, then we have to increase the price. But they'll never say that.
No, they don't.
That's never part of the equation.
No.
Greedy people, right?
The supply is labor low, the natural consequence. Increase the wages. No, we can't do that. What are you talking about? This is capitalism. But we'll definitely use machine technology to replace these people because that works for us. Well, you would have done that anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the idea that it's going to be possible to when I remember a couple of years ago when they were starting to introduce, a few years ago, I guess, when they were starting to introduce the machines at McDonald's that you could, like, the touch screen order machines. I remember seeing people, libertarianish people posting, like these memes that have like a picture of that machine. It would say, "Oh, you want $15 an hour? Meet your replacement." And I remember thinking, it's like, really, you believe that it's possible to win a race to the bottom with this machine, for inexpensiveness, that, like, I'm pretty sure that you could literally not pay people at all and just, maybe, give them a place to stay and then like hire an armed guard to make sure they didn't leave. It'd still be more expensive.
I have
that fucking machine.
I have a degenerate Negro capitalist friend I know who's always talking about how, raising the minimum wage is atrocious. This, by the way, is a guy whose whole life was bankrolled by the fact that his mom was a union employee as a nurse. But the larger point is that I said, well, that's because, a parasite like you, even if you had slave labor, you'd fire them for machines because you'd be worried that they'd dirty your toilets when they use the bathroom. And he literally said, well, I don't like dirty toilets. I know, because you're a vampire degenerate.
When I was working in North Dakota, and this was 2010 or so, 2011, McDonald's people were making $20 an hour, and they had to pay for their room and board because there was nowhere for them to stay. They weren't local townspeople. They had to fly in, work for McDonald's.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I do also want to plug. I think one of the smartest things that I remember reading last summer about police killings and the larger dynamics of aggressive militarized policing, and mass incarceration, which was a article in Dissent magazine, which could be a little hit or miss. I do not love their Latin America coverage, but they do.
By the way, can we post a link to that book, which I think is very important?
Oh, yeah.
Not punishing the poor.
Yep.
You get that, Ben? Or
Yeah, Forrest, Q, get that, and I'll share the screen. But yeah, so the article I'm talking about is by Barbara Fields and Adam Rothman. It's called "The Death of Hannah Pfizer," and it's a really good. It's like a fairly short article, but it's like something that I often wish that I could make like strap all of my liberal friends down, like the kid in Clockwork Orange, with the eyes open, to force them to read this article, because it's such a good overview of the dynamics of the element of racialization that Pascal's talking about, but also the larger economic dynamics that he was also talking about of this turn towards aggressive militarized policing and mass incarceration, and the case that Fields, who people haven't read what Barbara Fields and her sister have written elsewhere, should go out and read it all. It's all really good, but is that there is that Black people disproportionately suffer from the effects of aggressive militarized policing and mass incarceration because Black people disproportionately live in poor neighborhoods, and poor neighborhoods disproportionately suffer the effects of that kind of policing and carceral regime. But it's something that has I think if you purely focus on the racial dimension of it, you miss something that's really important about the larger issues. So Hannah Pfizer was a woman in Missouri who ran a red light. According to police reports, she was non-compliant and threatened the officers. The officers shot and killed her. In fact, Pfizer did not have a gun. Now that she's dead, could not tell her side of the story. Pfizer was a poor white woman, but the way that Rothman and Pfizer frame it, right, it's certainly racially disproportionate, because of America's apartheid history, but it's also there is this larger dynamic there, and that one that should maybe inform the political strategy that could actually start to do something about all of that, and so they talk about the lead up to the Civil War and the politics of the early Republican primary, and there's this paragraph in there that I always really loved, which is, therefore those seeking genuine democracy must fight like hell to convince white Americans that what is good for Black people is also good for them. Reining in murderous police, investing in schools rather than prisons, providing universal health care, including drug treatment and rehabilitation for addicts in the rural heartland, raising taxes on the rich, and ending foolish wars are policies that could benefit a solid majority of the American people. Such an agenda could be the basis for a successful political coalition rooted in the real conditions of American life, which were disastrous before the pandemic and are now catastrophic. So anyway, I would recommend that people read that article.
I've been in the heartland. I spent too many years in the heartland, and also places like West Virginia, and being a kid from California, from a relatively decent sized city, of course, I look at these problems of inequality as extremely racialized, because that's the only lens that I really saw it through. And working in the Gulf of Mexico, and then also working in North Dakota, And there's certain parts of the Gulf of Mexico where there was nothing but they call them coon asses is the term, but it's like white Cajuns in the swamp. And a lot of these guys couldn't read. And it kind of fucked my head up because I had never seen that before. And they hated police, and they had warrants and baby mamas and drug problems and and all the shit that we think only happens in certain urban areas. But you know, these kind of police killings happen.
Yeah. Well, I was also just going to throw in, you know, when Pascal was talking about this sort of conservative culturalism about the you know, pathologies of the urban poor, they like, I think something that's been really interesting to see in like about the last 5 years is conservatives and, you know, also liberals in many cases adopted exactly the same rhetoric that they always used about black people in cities to
underclass ideology with the potential fear of the rise of Trump. You found white conservatives. As a matter of fact, there was an article in the National Review to this particular point, and I remember the neoliberal CNN talking android, what's his name, Fareed Zakaria, wrote an article as well, making the same point that, you know, listen, the white poor are degenerates; they can't be saved. Yep. They're all jacked up, and which is ironic, right? Because part of what this is a consistent theme that we have at This Is Revolution podcast is what we call the 50-year counter revolution. I think you've heard us use this term before, Ben, that we basically talk about how 50 years from, say, the death of Martin Luther King, with the rise of Nixon and onward, there was a bipartisan consensus rooted in political economy and politics that was a pushback against not the New Deal Civil Rights Coalition and all the politics that came along with that. And that, contrary to the normative function of the Republican Party, started with Nixon, there was a courting of the white working class, you know, the hard hat rebellion and all of this. And, you know, it's like, we are loyal. These are our people. You know, don't let these darkies come here and these hippies with their long hair tarnish our great country. You know, you're Union men. You know, Nixon was very strong about this, as a matter of fact. Reagan with the Reagan Democrats again. So Clinton with the third wave politics that comes along with the rise of the DLC, which is actually a result of a polling data, state data polling study that showed that because of the Democratic Party's perception as being the party of black people, white working class people were being turned away and becoming conservative, starting with, you know, the run of Jesse Jackson in '84 going on to '88 with Mondale, with '88 with Dukakis, and that, you know, the Democrats had to shift away from this. So, you know, Bill Clinton again accepting his nomination from the DLC in front of Stone Mountain Prison. The assassination or the murder of Ricky Ray Rector that goes on under Clinton while Clinton is running, who was a man who was almost lobotomized in terms of his mental functionality, tough on crime, no more welfare reform. All of that posture was an intentional pivot. It starts a little bit with Carter, actually, but not as excessively. That actually begin with the rise of the third wave neoliberal order post-Reagan with Clinton, that really, really doubles down even worse on Nixonian and Reaganite policy vis-a-vis poverty and crime to present to the lords of capital and the financiers of politics. And my position on government is the government serves the purpose of the function of capital in America, that the Democrats were willing to play ball now. Enough with this, civil rights stuff, the blacks and all this other stuff, and and the women. We're down with big capital. And one of the consequences of that was that the carceral state expanded and the financing of police in the police state became more aggressive and became worse. And because all of this counter-revolution, and what took us here was about working class poor people in the return to underclass ideology, is that in that 50-year history, after neoliberalism, after NAFTA, after GATT, after the gutting of working class jobs, after the gutting of factory, with the rise of meth labs and alcoholism and rising white suicide, now because of the paranoia of Trump, you have white conservatives and white liberals saying, "You white poor people are degenerate. Pull up your pants."
Mhm.
Yeah, well, yeah, right, exactly.
When that pathologizing urban underclass discourse was used over the last 50 years relative to black people, you had black conservatives like Thomas Sowell, Glenn Lowry, black liberals as well, quite frankly, Henry Louis Gates, arguing that the problem is with the black underclass.
Bill Cosby.
And now you've got like the hillbilly elegy guy who's filling exactly, and I mean exactly that same spot. He's just the rural white people Thomas Sowell.
What is his name?
Oh, God, I forget.
The white people Thomas Sowell. That just hit me what you said.
The guy,
the lawyer or something, right?
Yeah, JD Vance, that's the dude. So that was like a big hit after he's actually, I think he's running for something as Republican now. And it's kind of funny because he's actually sort of pandering a little bit to the Trump wing as he's doing it. But right after the 2016 election, that book was a big hit because it told a lot of liberals and never Trump Republicans what they wanted to hear, which is that people in economically devastated, places in the Rust Belt and Appalachia, where Trump won, were really to blame for all of their problems, because of bad culture.
Well, first of all, understand something. The origins of the urban underclass or the culture of poverty discourse goes back to the University of Chicago School of Social Work and Economics in the early 20th century that was shifting away from eugenic explanations for poverty, which were the norm in America from the late 19th century to the early 20th century, and basically realizing that they did not want to admit that political economy is what was the root of poverty. They made a slight shift, particularly with the rise of Nazi Germany, that made eugenics fall out and say that, okay, it's the culture. Well, Chicago was always rooted in the kind of it's the culture that's the problem. This is the National, Victoria Reed's book demonstrates how the National Urban League actually gets born out of the University of Chicago's social work program with Rosenwald Trust and Rockefeller Trust funding to basically start the process, this old civil rights organization, of saying, well, the reason why we can't have you Negroes live in the nicer parts of Chicago and New York is because you're culturally defective. So what happens is that's the beginning of the culturally contrary to what these worthless black conservatives will tell you. It was like, oh, it was welfare and the civil rights movement that destroyed black people. Every time they say that about the destruction of black families, I ask them, and you guys read E. Franklin Frazier's studies on the black family in the 1930s, where he basically is saying that this is something that existed well before, the Great Society, and well before out of wedlock. The rate of black out of wedlock birth has been twice that of whites since the 1800s. So the notion that this is somehow was welfare, it was the state, and it was the moral failing, and this is all rooted to the political economy and the displacement of the capacity of poor and working class black men to subsidize large families, and as a result, they may flee and basically not be able to care economically for their condition. The same way, if you look at Italian Americans and Irish Americans who were poor in the early 20th century, particularly in urban areas, they had profoundly high rates of out of wedlock birth.
Yeah, I mean, of course, and there is this has always amazed me because it seems like if you think the chain of cause and effect goes from poverty to broken families, that's pretty easy to see how that goes. Right. I think anybody who's just been around people, right, can trace out some ways that that could happen, the ways that financial stress and insecurity and instability make it harder to keep relationships together, that that there are all sorts of secondary consequences that could lead to that. Whereas what conservatives insist on believing, which is that
well, if we're going to ask why do they insist on, but they don't believe it. They say it because the greedy parasites do not want the state to finance political economy that lifted most of these degenerates like Thomas Sowell into the middle class with things like the GI Bill and the New Deal, and Walter White, another black conservative.
Yeah, I mean, because the idea that like a phrase that they like to use is the success sequence, which says that if you graduate from school and you wait until you wait until after you get married to have kids, and there are like a few other things in it, right? Then you'll have then you'll rise out of poverty. And it's like, I mean, it's such a weird joke, it's like it really is like the equivalent of like one of those examples that they'll give you on the first day of a stats class about correlation and causation, like, thinking that, that the, it's like, okay, there are more snake bites on, days that there are more ice cream sales because both things happen on hot days. That's not because snakes are attracted to ice cream.
What's even better is when their whole argument is reduced to this imbecilic tautology. What is that? Oh, the black poor and the white poor are damaged because they have horrible culture. And the culture of the black poor and the white poor is damaged because they are poor. It's absurd.
Yeah, and I should also mention, by the way, that when people do make that historically illiterate argument about great society, welfare programs, just causing out of wedlock births, then like I always found that funny, because even if you take that seriously, like you ask them, okay, why is that, right? What's the mechanism? And what they'll say, and this goes back to what we were saying earlier about like how weirdly honest they can be about some of these things in certain circumstances. What they'll say is, oh, well, it's because, mothers are, less economically, dependent on men. So they're more or less likely to stay with them. And so it's like, so you're admitting, right, that like for the purpose of running this bullshit historical argument, you're acknowledging that in fact, social services, social provision make us, make people more free. That that this is that people stay oftentimes in bad or even abusive relationships because they can't afford to move out. Right? You're admitting that this is a thing that happens. You're just you just think that it's a bad thing. That it's a bad thing.
By the way, two very good books that help shatter that. It was the welfare that made single parenthood happen in the black community is The Color of Welfare by Jill Quandango, which is a good book here. The Color of Welfare. And another one is called The Undeserving Poor by Michael B. Katz. Another good book here as well, which, really destroys this kind of absurd nonsense, particularly, again, if you want to go back to E. Franklin Frazier's and his study of black families well before the Great Society, and you tell me exactly and he illustrates how fractured those societies were at that time. You tell me exactly how is it that the great welfare is what destroyed the breakdown of the black family. Because again, we have a lot of nationalists and black people who like to blame, like black people are broken, they're damaged, and most of them don't realize it is actually a whole damaged thesis. As a matter of fact, there's a good book written by a historian named Darrell Michael Scott called Contempt and Pity, and the argument of the book is that basically between the liberals and conservatives, the damaged thesis of black people renders them to be contempted, be victims of contempt by conservatives and pitied by liberals, neither one of which are actually interested in solving the problems of the black poor and the working class. So what ends up being the consequence, right, is that we have this kind of two poles of damage thesis, where we have that, well, black people are unable to function for themselves. So we've got to give them some charity and philanthropy and fund Black Lives Matter. And oh, yes, of course, we love all these vapid academic disciplines. Oh, yes, intersectionality is wonderful. We need these things. Or that we need more cops to put these undeserving Negroes in prison. Again,
wasn't that the 90s?
Again, and the function of this discourse, which Black liberals and conservatives, again, both participate in, is to both of them get what I call fatback and biscuits or patronage from their respective paymasters to maintain the hierarchy of capitalist power and stop the realization that Black people suffer from poverty because the political economy of American capitalism requires that a disproportionate amount and number of them are rendered to the reserve army of labor. And until we change the nature of the way capitalism functions in this country, that will never stop, no matter how much goddamn reparations you get or you think you're going to get.
Yeah, I mean, and of course that it's an important historical point, because one of the big defenses that's often trotted out of Bill Clinton, although I guess people are slightly less interested in defending the Clinton administration now, but they were very recently, and now of course Biden, because remember there are 100 clips that Forrest could show you of Biden referring to the crime bill as the Biden crime bill. He loved taking credit for that thing at the time, and one of the big defenses of it is, oh no, wait a second, but it's okay, right? Because it can't be racist, because look at all these Black people who supported.
Well, listen, they've always been, listen, man. There's a very great quote by Frantz Fanon: "The oppressed will always believe the worst about themselves," and quite frankly. The Black middle class and the vapid Black political class and the Black petite bourgeoisie has a long history of ruling class treachery in working with the working class, with the ruling class and elites to ground the Black poor and working class to powder. Organizations like the National Urban League were originally created to basically create a cultural mechanism to ensure that Blacks moving up to the northern urban environments were screened out based on their cultural competency using uplift paradigms to make sure that those who were considered dysfunctional got substandard housing. So we have whole legacy organizations that Black people celebrate to this day that were rooted in pathologizing poor and working class Black people, that have created whole economic mechanisms for elite people like Vernon Jordan and others to become collaborators with the ruling class in the facilitation of this charade of racial unity to make sure Black poor and working class people are ground to powder. The Urban League and the NAACP supported eugenics in the early 20th century that disproportionately had Black women sterilized under the idea of racial uplift. There's a whole good book called I forgot the name of it. I wrote an article in Black Agenda Report called Black Eugenics, how the Black middle class supported sterilization of the Black poor in the early 20th century, and about how eugenic schemes, the author's name is Chantella Sherman.
We did a eugenics episode as well.
Yeah, the book is called In Search of Purity. Eugenics and the New Negroes of a certain age. It's called In Search of Purity. It was a dissertation. I think you can find the book. I actually had some ridiculous Black academic would say, well, the eugenics that they really were arguing for was selective marriage. Most of them didn't really want the women to be sterilized, as if that was any better.
Yeah, I should also mention, since you were talking earlier about the sort of historical transition from eugenic kinds of justifications of poverty to culturalist ones, that in the 90s, when this kind of neoliberal counter-revolution really reached its its peak in a lot of ways, that coincided with the revival of the old genetic strategy, right? I mean, that's when Charles Murray and Edward Hertzstein came out with.
We're recycling early 20th century now. We're in the every time you hear these morons talking about, I'm an alpha male, I'm a beta male, I'm a this kind of man. That's all eugenics talk. When you see all of this discourse about like, it's like, what is it called? Selective, the way in which women select mates, hypergamy. It's like, as if people are lab rats. And eugenics actually, and one thing that our friend Jeff Kennedy, shout out to Jeff, eugenics has been on the rise in academics work, in charter schools, and all of this stuff, because this is part, as it was in the early 20th century, because this is part of the cyclical centennial nature of how capitalism, in its need to reboost itself into a next century, recycles anti-immigration. Early 20th century, we had that. Eugenics, we had that. We also had, when it came to not necessarily prison, but convict leasing for blacks that didn't end until 1941. We had that as well. So this was a recycling of early 20th century policies that were implemented by the ruling class, realizing that there was a need with the coming centennial crisis of capitalism, which, contrary, this is not a conspiracy theory. If you understand that basically there are whole models of the way in which economics is planned in terms of on a centennial calendar every 100 years, that we realize that capitalism always finds and needs a mechanism to reorientate itself in American society on a centennial basis to basically kick it into the next century. This is something that's happened, particularly usually when you look at history, there are wars that occur in certain periods of time relative to the early aughts of certain centuries, et cetera, so on and so forth. So what happens is that these methodologies that were very popular in the early 20th century, again, anti-immigration, eugenics, prison, are recycled with the coming 21st century because capitalism is now still in the crisis, and they're trying to find a way to kick it into the 21st century without the need to go to some kind of global conflagration with a war, which we could have had in 2016. Maybe if Hillary was president, who knows? Maybe we could have gone at it with the Russians over Syria, possibly. But the larger point I'm trying to say is that we are still in a stage, we are early enough in capitalism where the crisis of 21st century capitalism is causing the ruling class to need to try to reorient itself and find a way to secure the exodus of this system and still continue to ground more, not only black and brown people to powder, but an increasing number of white, poor, and working class people to powder. And that's often going to be done through mechanization, automation, technology, robotics, etc.
Yeah, and the bell curve, the most famous chapter of the bell curve, of course, was the one was the race chapter, which is partially because I think the publisher released that earlier. It was run in, I don't know, the Atlantic or something, one of those magazines, and that was like a smart marketing strategy for them because they knew that would get everybody's attention. But the bulk of the bell curve is not actually about race. The bulk of the bell curve is a sort of general claim that there is that like economic disparities in general come out of genetic differences in intelligence. So that genetic strategy is explicitly supposed to also be about non-black poor people. And
why do you think there's so much why do you think degenerates like Jordan Peterson and all these other conservatives talk about IQ tests in the 21st century now, as they did in the early 20th century? Why do you think IQ test discourse is so popular now? It's the same recycled nonsense.
Yeah, and now we have the the culturalist version of it is in all those ways we talked about earlier with J.D. Vance, the Old Billy Elegy, with like the stuff that Kevin Williamson was writing for the National Review, where he was basically like saying that it's it's all everybody's fault in Appalachia because they haven't like just picked up and moved to where the jobs are. Since that's a pair, which is a got to say that's a awfully attractive.
Who was Robert Reich? Wasn't it Robert Reich in the 90s said, y'all, they can learn to code or something ridiculous?
Yeah. Well, and the thing
was
is,
it Robert Reich that said that?
Yeah, well, Robert Reich was actually pretty bad in the 90s.
He was in Clinton's cabinet.
Yeah, exactly.
He had his come to Jesus moment with the coming of Trump.
Yeah. But 90s Robert, a little before that, I think. But 90s Robert Reich was pretty bad. He was a straight down the line Clintonite. And that was also essentially the strategy of, the Obama administration, if you look at what they did, like for unemployed people in coal country, it was essentially just telling them to learn to code. They sort of put a technology training center here and there. So like if you're a, 45-year-old laid off coal miner, then, theoretically, if, there's a job as a programmer that comes available somewhere that you can get it, you can, have fun competing with 22-year-old college graduates, for it, which is a really, weird insult. Of course, like to everybody's intelligence that they think that that, oh no, don't worry, right? You're all going to get highly skilled, jobs now. But it is very much of a piece with the sort of, Bill Cosby, Thomas Sowell stuff that you were talking about earlier, that, that it's like really, if you just, pull up your pants, you go to college, whatever, that's the solution.
And don't for-profit universities blow up in the first Obama term as well? Didn't he change some lending regulations?
Charter schools, all of that stuff. All of that is, of course, about neutralizing the fact. Charter schools is the neoliberal Negroes love the charter schools, which I always find funny. So why is it that white people who have good public schools in their neighborhoods are never big advocates of charter schools? Why is it always? Because it was like, our public schooling is horrible.
Did you watch Waiting for Superman? That damn charter school porn?
Oh, no,
I watched that back when it came out, and I was like, this doesn't even feel right.
Not to mention that the fact that there's no demonstrative. First of all, charter schools, as we know, are designed to make sure that children who do not have developmental skills, behavioral problems, or certain particular intellectual incapacities because of social behavior are siphoned out. So basically, you have privatization in terms of schools that are actually making sure that kids who would have been the best students anyway are basically getting this education. And even under those paradigms, they haven't demonstratively shown that they were great. And the greatest thing that happened to demonstrate the shenanigans behind charter schools is that all these vapid Negroes who love charter schools so much all of a sudden started to guffaw and say, "Oh my, clutch the pearls!" When Betsy DeVos becomes Secretary of Education, because she's the biggest charter school pimp mama in the history of the country, and everyone starts to say, "Oh my God, what have we been supporting?"
Yeah, no, for sure, and I think also it's. Yeah, I think on the charter school point, blanking for a second. I read his book. The Cult of Smart by Freddie DeBoer has some really damning stuff on charter schools, and they're making exactly the point that Pascal.
By the way, there are some black scholars who believe that charter schools also are a fast track in the school to prison pipeline in facilitating mass incarceration as well. By the way, because of the insane and absurd, abusive disciplinary mechanisms that are used in the schools, and how quickly these kids are rendered to that type of punishment. Yeah,
no, and I think that so in Cult of Smart, he's making exactly that point about how what statistics are supposed to show that charter schools perform really well is just a function of the fact that unlike public schools, they get to pick their students. And also it's worth mentioning that Waiting for Superman, that movie, I believe repeatedly references Finland about like how, look at how great the schools are in Finland, how much better those are than American schools. So we could have these great charter schools that are just like these Finnish schools. And they don't mention that in Finland, it's like those are extremely heavily unionized schools, but B, they're all public. Private schools are actually illegal in Finland. So it's just complete bullshit on the face of it, and it's also like really like it's one of these things, and I guess this goes back to what Pascal was saying earlier about what people believe, what they pretend to believe, what they have ideological interests in believing, so they sort of convince themselves of. But this belief that's like one of the most like widely held bipartisan things in American politics, that education is a solution to poverty. That's something that like your conservative Facebook uncle who says like, oh, those McDonald's workers should just go back to school if they want better wages. He believes that, but it's also something that Barack Obama believes. He said in one of his State of the Union addresses, this is an exact quote, I remember we played it on TNBS, that the best anti-poverty program that's ever been devised, Obama said, is a world-class education. Like this is such a widely held belief, but it's something that
I guess. What about the WPA? What about the Work Project Commission?
right.
Isn't that what Reagan, of all people, isn't that what Reagan loved?
What about the
Isn't that what made
12 million
Reagan's family diehard Democrats was because of the WPA?
Yeah,
they got him out of poverty.
Literally lifted Reagan's family out of poverty. What about the 12 million government jobs that were created by FDR? What about the union jobs?
I mean, so someone had commented in the
some
chat.
people will argue that college education is actually something that actually causes massive amount of debt. Some people will use the racial wealth gap discourse to show that actually it disproportionately economically disadvantages Black people because they have less legacy capital. They have to borrow more debt, and they have less family resources, that they actually are burdened with more debt. Not only that, there is if there's anything that makes the argument that college education will assure you that you're going to be successful in America, was that after the 2008 crash with the rise of Bernie Sanders, you had Yale PhDs talking about, I'm a socialist now, because they were economically precarious because they were all adjuncts, couldn't get a tenure track job, making less than $35,000 a year, and some college graduates from elite schools were working at Starbucks as baristas.
This is kind of a little bit too close to some of my experience. I think I'm getting PTSD from this, but I think, but I'd also point out, that like just as just to maybe be a little bit too much of a pedantic nerd about this, but like even without that empirical data, on the face of it, like just conceptually, this idea that education is the solution to poverty makes no sense, because if the idea is that education is the solution to poverty, which I mean it certainly can be in individual cases, but I mean if you are that, look, we have all these poor people, so the solution is that they'll go to school and acquire skills that they could use to get higher paying jobs. I mean, that hold on.
The capitalist.
Let him finish, Pascal. Let him finish.
In this scenario, who's doing the old lower paying jobs, right? If there's nobody, picking the lettuce, if there's nobody driving the food to grocery stores, then we all starve to death. So clearly, even on its own terms, this idea that everybody who has those low paid jobs goes back to school, gets technical skills, which, by the way, those technical skills wouldn't command much of the job market anyway if everybody had them, right? And by definition, they only command anything. They only give you a superior negotiating position because they're relative scarcity. But even if somehow magically that did happen, that there were magically created all of these spots further up the economic hierarchy, having professional managerial kinds of jobs, then either you'd like, one way or the other, right? Somebody has to do the jobs that are currently lower paid, right? Which is why, I mean, every time I think about this, I always think about the Eugene V. Debs line, when Wilson was imprisoning him, for speaking out against World War I. He says, I don't want to rise through the ranks. I want to rise with the ranks. That at a certain, like, you have to, you have to have the ranks themselves rising, or else you're just rearranging the pieces within an economic hierarchy, and you might have different people on top, like that could totally happen. That that you can like rearrange which specific individuals are in the middle class or in the ruling class. But just conceptually, there's no way it could happen that you'd have education solve like poverty as a social phenomenon like that.
First of all, using the supply and demand arguments of the capitalists, if everyone had a college educated job, what would be the value of those college degrees in the labor market? Because it would be saturated with college educated people. It would literally collapse the value of the education and collapse its competitive marketability and enable to actually provide you with a quality of good of living. So the notion that everyone going to college is a solution is kind of ridiculous. I mean, particularly when we live in a country where someone who is a welder or a plumber or who can actually lay pipe makes more money than a lot of people who have MBAs.
Yeah.
It's somebody asked in the chat, they were saying, not trying to be a dick, but are we supposed to be talking about the Chauvin trial? And I the way I feel, and I know Pascal feels this way a little bit, this to me is more in line with the verdict, the trial, the actual thing that happened with George Floyd, because we can talk about that shit forever, and people are going to talk about that shit forever about what cops shouldn't have. They don't need guns, and they need white gloves, and they need social workers.
But they don't want to have this conversation because it's why? Just like talking about black on black crime. What about black on black crime? What about the political economy that causes black on black crime? Every time you hear some degenerate talking about black on black crime, and he's going to talk about solving the political economy that causes that crime, just understand that he just wants to basically shut down poor and working class black people and say they're degenerate, they're defective, and they need to be policed and housed because they are causing my middle class, worthless Cornell law degree having ass to depreciate my quality of life.
Yeah, I would also say that I mean, just to draw a more direct connection. George Floyd was a worker who'd lost his job, who was murdered for trying to pass a bad $20 bill. Yeah. So I mean, I don't think that you can, which makes the point that we made several times in this discussion. I mean, I don't think you can have a conversation about police abuses that makes any sense without talking about the dynamics of poverty and the way it's managed, because that's the underlying issue.
You have to have this conversation.
By the way, the conversation is tailored to not talk about these problems, because what we're talking about right now is the key as to why George Floyd is dead. It's the key as to why police do what they do. It's the key as to why black men disproportionately fill up prisons. You know why? Because people, particularly large numbers of black people, don't want to realize that capitalism facilitates the disproportionate oppression in this country, because you have moron elites in the black community who are pushing black capitalism as a solution to their problem without realizing that trash has been used for years to make sure that a tiny core elite of Negroes have nice middle-class conditions while the majority of poor and working class black people get ground to dust.
Yeah. Jason,
so that's why you have people who are talking about, we need more black banks, and read The Color of Money, talking about how much black banking does absolutely nothing for the condition of black people.
Well, we had an episode with Jared Ball talking about the myth of the black buying power. I mean, I kind of wanted to, I thought we were going to talk a little bit more, and I definitely wanted to get your and Pascal's view on this, about kind of this war on drugs and poverty starting actually from the 70s. With decriminalization laws that didn't get passed in black cities with a black political establishment. DC for one of them. DC had an opportunity to pass a legalization of marijuana law in 72. That would just, I think anything over 2 ounces would have been a citation. It had been decriminalized in Oregon already by that time. And there was a pushback from the community, because marijuana, even though a study had came out that year by Nixon's, not the drug czar, I can't remember the guy's exact position, but a study had came out that year that said, look, marijuana is not addictive, it's not going to kill you, and it is not a gateway drug. When that study comes out, a man on the city council, a man named Mark Clark, says, why don't we decriminalize marijuana because there's too many young black kids that are getting locked up for long periods of time and their lives are being ruined with these felonies.
Yeah. By the way, I'll answer
Okay.
Gene's question by saying that I believe in compassion towards people suffering from mental illness, and I'll leave it at that. But in any case, I think that those are all connections that that need to be made, because it's both are true, right? That there's a larger explanation in terms of the material base, and also that there are a series of specific political decisions that are made by particular actors in the Nixon administration, and afterwards. But in any case, I do want to to do both in a different sense, because I agree with Pascal. I think this is the larger conversation that you need to have to talk about the murder of George Floyd and the and the aftermath of that, leading up to the Chauvin conviction. But I also do want to talk about those things themselves, and also talk about a third thing in what time we have left, which is the point that I know that Pascal wants to make about the way that we process these things kind of as political spectacle. But I think of those things, to do the thing that we've done the least of, because I think we've been talking at a very big picture level. I do want to bring Forrest on, if he's here.
And shout out to Left Flank Vets that are checking out the show. I saw them in the chat. Shout out Gene Bajlan. What's up, Gene?
Yeah. Yep. We love Gene.
Do you want to do the doctor one, which kind of ties into the obviously like the scare or fear mongering about drug laws, or do you want to do there's the police kind of turning on Chauvin, and that kind of I think that's the spectacle part of it.
Police were cheering him on, you said?
No, the police turning on him.
Oh, yeah. Turning on, I'm sorry.
Like his chief, the chief of police in Minneapolis, or Chauvin's chief, basically came out and said that the maneuver he did wasn't like a tactic they taught, and then they had one of the people that trained him, this woman, come and say basically, oh, this is not how we train people. I don't know what that maneuver is like. So I think that's kind of the spectacle part. Yeah, let's
do that, and but I also do want to just quickly address. There's I think maybe because the title we managed to attract a few reactionaries in the chat, and one of them says, and this might be meant in the spirit of trolling, but I think it's a point worth addressing because it ties into a lot of what we talked about. This person asks, I would like to put a question to Jason and Pascal. Why not privatize security? Let the people themselves hire that security. They feel best safeguards their rights at the best price. And I would say that this actually cuts to one source of my discomfort with abolition rhetoric, because if you have a class society and you don't have security being provided by public employees, it is for damn sure can be provided by private companies. And as bad, racist, and oppressive and violent as the cops are, the one thing that's actually worse than that is private cops, because then you've removed the last shred of pretense of accountability to some sort of democratic mechanism.
I've had my dealing with definitely private police forces in where I lived, and then working with the unhoused, and I have a lot of opinions about how that shit ends up working, and it's never good. I think that's probably a bit of a joke. I'm hoping that's a bit of a joke.
Yeah, no,
I don't think it's a joke at all.
I think they were joking. I think they were joking.
I don't know if
They've
this
been
particular
saying
person was joking or it was a sort of they're actually a right winger and just being like sort of a little trollish and throwing it out there. But I think it is. I think it is actually something that's important to to talk about. Because the idea. I mean, I guess one way to put it is this, right? I mean, like I think there are a lot of like police reform proposals that I would. Yeah, exactly. So there are a lot of police reform proposals that I think would actually be good and valuable in terms of making it easier, like having things that aren't just like toothless community review boards, but actually have the power to fire cops. Having like severely demilitarizing police by taking away the ability to send like SWAT teams to various things you can send them to right now, banning the sale of surplus
everywhere. You can send SWAT teams wherever you want to send them right now.
But again, this goes back to the whole like policing of poverty, and it goes back to the whole like, okay, do we think? Go ahead.
That's what I was just going to say, though, right? Because I think that all of these things would help, and I support them, right? But also, I think that you are going to have like some sort of like the idea that that not having police as public employees, especially if the backdrop of a class society, is going to mean that things like this just don't happen. I'm very skeptical about it. I mean, if you look at the history of private security, and to the extent that private security now isn't as bad as it used, sure, a private security guard whose function is just to call the cops, right, might not be as bad, but they have but think about like the history of like militaristic privatized strike breaking, like in the 19th century and the early 20th century, the Pinkertons would like massacre people.
How did this work out with George Zimmerman?
Right, exactly. Yeah, that was the and I think that's the kind of thing that that you're going to have. When it's very easy to say, oh, we'll have sort of spout these ultra left slogans. Well, we'll have like non-professionalized, popular, democratic, this, that. It's like, okay, but like, does the gated community also get one?
The main problem with privatizing police is that since you're putting the burden of paying for security on the capacity of the citizenry, then it automatically guarantees that people who are poor and working class are going to have substandard policing, where they either have no police and are more rendered to the carceral state and mass incarceration, or are going to have subpar police that are going to be probably more abusive or lacking in their care of the people in those communities.
And I'm not going to say anything because I was going to say pretty much the same thing, and you said it more eloquently than I.
Or you get stuck with like a feudal situation where, in order to get police to lower income communities of any kind, like you have to pay basically like a fealty to some kind of boss above you. And the more you really privatize things, like in the libertarian sense, where like government completely abdicates any responsibility towards it, the more you really get to that feudal state, I think.
No, exactly. And again, the point is that a private security is only even pretends to be accountable to the people who are signing their paychecks.
The fiduciary duty of a private security guard to the citizenry is only contractual. It's not constitutional. And that's why private security is going to be defective, because there is no actual requirement that they respect your constitutional rights, because they do not have the political fiduciary relationship that a government state entity has with you.
This person, I think you're just being a troll at this point, dude. You're saying things like, of course, would you ever hire a police force that would wage a drug war against you? Of course not. But now you're getting to the point of who can afford the better police force. If I have more money, I'm going to have the baddest police force. It's silly talk.
The question isn't whether you'd hire somebody to do this to you. If you're hiring them, they're not doing anything to you. The question is whether the rich guy who owns the building that you live in, or who owns the company that runs everything in town, whether he, what the security that he would hire would do to you.
Have any of these people that asked that dumbass question ever been in country where law enforcement is pretty much non-existent, and it's a series of private security, that shit's fucking frightening. Have you ever been around fucking a narco town where they say don't look that way, man, because that's, you know,
Yeah,
that's not
I
the
mean,
street to
look,
look at.
think about Brazil. You know, the
Fuck yeah, that's where I'm
you know-
talking about. Brazil, certain parts of Mexico.
yeah. I mean, Marielle Franco wasn't wasn't killed by the police. She was killed by by a paramilitary gang that certainly has links to Bolsonaro's movement. But also like directly controls a bunch of of territory in like classic gang fashion. And and that, I think that's like that's a I always think of one of my favorite short I don't agree with Sam Cedar about everything. He's a liberal, but he sometimes like he'll do these little debates with libertarian callers that are a lot of fun to watch sometimes. And he one of them one of my all-time favorites was a guy who claimed to be he said he was an anarcho-capitalist, and they were talking and they started like going through like what this anarcho-capitalist world would be like, and I don't even remember what the question. And of course you had like Michael sort of sitting there in one corner making fun of him and making fun of the guy, and Sam's like, no, come on, and like Jamie Peck is like trying to like argue with him about the definition of anarchist, and Sam's like, no,
Oh, I know exactly.
Right? And then he says, and then he's like going through various problems that could arise in this world. He's like, how would you solve these? And the anarcho-capitalist callers of assassinations, and Sam says, oh, cool world. Which is is always what I think about. It's like, yeah, no, let's definitely make the United States more like Brazil.
And that's more towards where we're going to. I don't know if you follow or read Douglas Rushkoff. He wrote the book Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus. He had an interesting write-up in Medium last year, I think it was, where he was brought in to talk to some tech gajillionaires. And he's given his usual talk about his issues with tech and all the shit. And at the end, he's like, I don't think these guys are paying attention. So they're like, well, that's all fine and great. We just want to know, what do we do with our guards when money has no value? We want you to help us out for that. And he was kind of blown away by it, because he's like, these guys already know where we're headed. And these are the people that already live in places like New Zealand. And, they have the private islands in Hawaii where you might catch that private law enforcement put a hot one in your ass if you cross the property line when you don't know where it is. And they're saying, when money no longer has a value and we just can't pay for our security, what is our next plan?
Yeah. Yep.
Digital currency,
Yeah, I saw I saw the first
biocurrency.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not
but that's a crazy thought to have. That's where, like, these people trying to have this silly little debate. It's like, this is the fantasy. You might as well be like, what if I traded my Will Clark for your, that's where you are. The real people with the real money are asking this question later. Hey, when I can no longer do this, how am I still going to be on top of the hill? That show Black Mirror, one of my favorite episodes is the mechanical dog episode, because if you watch it, it's in a world where that has already happened. If you remember, the mechanical dog is chasing her and she breaks into a gigantic house. Remember? Where the people in it, I think, had took their own life, because that was the reality of this post-apocalyptic world.
I feel like a lot of times, like ANCAPs and libertarians think about it as if like almost like the strong will survive, like, you know what I mean, like the natural hierarchies will come up, but you're not, if everything falls apart and like it's all private security, all private military, like you're not starting from ground zero. It's whoever has the resources right now continues to have the resources. Like if money has no value, like you're at a point where like whoever has the guns, whoever has the military equipment right now still has the military equipment. You know what I mean? Like and like I don't know. So when it comes to like privatizing, like when it comes to like thinking about like a 100% private police force, like you'd be going with people that are already kind of running around with guns like vigilantes now, and that's that's a terrifying thought. Like you're thinking about like far right militias. You're thinking about like, you know what I mean? Like all of these groups that kind of have been that have deluded themselves into training for this. Like you're trusting your security to people who there's no interest in that. Like
yeah, I should say, by the way, parenthetically, because it came up in the chat, you know, mentioning that about Sam Cedar, the point is not to slam the guy. He's like, yeah, fucking Liam, you know. The point is that's not at all the point, right? The point is just that I think that as he would be the first one to say, right, his politics are not my politics, right? That's
fine.
My position on I think my end of the day position on police abolition is that the ones that we have now should be abolished as part of a process of getting rid of the existing system and replaced with and replacing it with a new one. At which point we can have a entirely new and different police force that can that could stop right wing counter revolutionaries. But
that's kind of how we had a movie night recently on This Is Revolution, and Pascal recommended that we watch The Spook Who Sat by the Door. I had never seen it.
Oh yeah, I love that movie.
And it was because it's being remade, and Lee Daniels apparently is remaking it, so we had to watch it before it gets ruined. And to me, it's an amazing movie. And we also had Angela Walker, who's actually now a part of the show on Saturdays, who ran for the Green Party VP candidate. And at one point she ran for sheriff. And we're starting to see people like Chesa Boudin, more far left socialist people getting in offices like district attorney. But what would law enforcement look like if, and I asked this question to Pascal, I ask it to Forrest and Ben, if there actually were socialist of leftist police chiefs?
I don't think that changes the actual nature of policing and the functionality of policing in this current economy. The question becomes, can we have a socialist society or a society that has an economic paradigm that's not based on cannibalizing people who are not in the 1% or relatively close to it, being able to police or govern our society? Because even if you have a bunch of socialists there might be socialists on the police. They might have DSA members or cops now. It doesn't change the particular functionality of police in a society of increasing precarity when you still have to basically relegate poor and working class people, disproportionately black, to the reserve army.
I'll push back. I say it changes in this capacity. If I'm a cop, I'm riding around looking for trouble. That's my job. If there's people that are just fundamentally against riding around looking for trouble, you're going to have less of these kind of quality of life stops.
I think the ideological infrastructure of the actual functionality of police supersedes the personal political proclivities of individuals who are police. There are probably good Christian soldiers who are cops who still kill people.
Yeah, I have an interesting situation going on here in Ulster County. We had this sheriff for a really long time. Our sheriffs are elected. So we had the sheriff for a really long time that had this really fucking awful drug enforcement program called Urgent, to the point where Trump invited him to the White House to like hang out for a day because he was like praising his drug enforcement things. So they started at the bottom row and they just like pretty much just raid houses and raid houses and raid houses until they get up. But because it's like, you've hung out in like Kingston before, Jason. Like it's like a very varied whatever. It's like a lot of the people that they end up like breaking into their houses and stuff are just like high school students that they're going to try to scare the shit out of. Like that's the target they like, or like college students they're going to try to scare the shit out of, like younger kids that they think, oh, maybe I can find my way up the chain. So we had this program going on, numbers wise, like the neoliberal like numbers data game, highly successful, terribly cruel. So there was this this guy that was in the state troopers that lives in this area, that lived in Kingston, that ran for sheriff, who's progressive, who ran on a platform of kind of instead of sending people to jail for opioids, which are a huge problem in this county, he was going to start sending people to rehabs or like other like more therapeutic whatever. And I mean, it's been somewhat successful, but like the nature of policing here hasn't changed. But he was like progressive police is kind of
where I grew up in Richmond, California. They actually had a very progressive police chief at one point in time that had really tried to change the model of what was going on, and people really loved the guy until he left. And the rates of murders went down, the crime rates went down drastically. So I would say there's a difference between Daryl Gates. Like, I get what you're saying, the system of policing, but when Daryl Gates, when Joe Arpaio, when these people say, I'm dropping the hammer, we're arresting everybody, and you get people like that out, and you get people with a real progressive agenda that says, you know what, we're going to be done with cash bail. We're not going to prosecute. We're not even going to go after quality of life crimes anymore. That really does change George Floyd's. It doesn't make it go away totally, right? But I'm not trying to police your poverty. We talk about all the time on the show. If I get pulled over, I don't have any warrants for putting a bullet in anybody. I might have a failure to appear on a traffic ticket, and now I got a warrant. But in that cop's eyes, he can fuck with me. That's wino time shit. Why do you think George Floyd got fucked with? That's wino time shit. They love fucking with guys with wino time. The prisons are filled with motherfuckers that done kill people. They arrest those people with kid fucking gloves because they're frightened. They know who to fuck with and who not to fuck with.
Yeah, it's like I remember thinking back in 2003 that one reason that I was absolutely certain that the Bush administration didn't believe that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction because if they did, they wouldn't have invaded. I think that I think that maybe both things can be somewhat true here. That there is like it does matter who's running some of these things. That it does matter, maybe who's the police chief. That like. Who's the sheriff, whether you have Daryl Gates or Joe Arpaio at the top of these things, certainly who's the DA, that matters too, that there's certainly a harm reduction calculus to that, and there's certainly ways that you can, even on a local level, you can implement things that really will reduce the damage that these institutions do. But at the same time, I think on a larger question, Pascal's just obviously right that there's the basic the basic problem is not that the wrong people are in charge of these institutions. The basic problem is the role that they play within our economic system, and so that's why the solution, again, I think that in my view, saying abolish the police is incredibly politically unhelpful because what most people will hear is that you don't want there to be some sort of publicly owned entity that isn't engaged in enforcing any laws, which is obviously insane. And also I think a lot of people who say that, when you really press them on that, they're pretty vague about what they mean. But at the same time, you should abolish, the kind that we have right now, because you should abolish the kind of economic system that we have right now, and as part of it, all of the institutions that enforce it, and you should replace it with something new. That new system will still have people who you can call it something other than the police, but we'll still have some sort of professional apparatus to enforce some laws, because I don't believe for a second that that rape and domestic violence and interpersonal conflict will wither away as soon as we change the economic system. But the police that exist right now, certainly, I mean, they serve the interests of capital because we live under capitalism. Like that just, I mean, that's the way it's going to be. And I think that system over time, unfortunately, is going to produce more Daryl Gateses than it is this guy that you're talking about, because that's what serves the interests of the people at the top of the top of society. It's a cheaper way of managing poverty than building a real welfare state is.
And there's blowback to Daryl Gates. I mean, if we look at Daryl Gates, his trajectory, and kind of just, Mike Davis, the great Mike Davis, writes about Los Angeles and California better than anyone I know. But when you think about how Daryl Gates came up with a series of police chiefs that were as bad as him, if not worse, and by the time he gets into power, it's kind of a horrible time for the city, right? You have a city that's becoming more and more deindustrialized. You also have a city that's being hit with a humongous flow of pure cocaine, right? So you have a horrible gang problem, and he was the wrong man. And not to say that if he wouldn't have been there, these things wouldn't have happened. But when you look at, and this is way before 94 crime bill, we're talking like 86. We're talking 82. They had to outlaw the chokehold in 82 because they were killing too many black people. And when that question was posed to Daryl Gates, he said, well, their arteries just work different. The carotid chokehold that they're trying with the George Floyd crime bill that they're trying to say we don't need anymore. The carotid chokehold wasn't used to beat the shit out of Rodney King and all the other dudes that got their ass whooped that didn't have it on camera.
I mean, the same people pushing the crime bill also were pushing stuff in the 80s. That's kind of where the momentum.
Joe Biden.
Joe Biden.
Yeah. No, exactly. And
By the way,
Biden's working with Strom Thurmond for a bunch of those bills too. I'm pretty sure.
I just posted a 2016 study from charter schools propping up the school-to-prison pipeline. These are the schools that black elites love so much that Cory Booker, Adrian Fenty, Arthur Davis, and Obama, the neoliberal black paradigm of the black political class that started in the early aughts. Those trial balloon, neoliberal, heavily corporate funded politicians were all major charter school pimps. Major charter school pimps. Talking about how black students are disproportionately up to 70 times more likely to be suspended and put through into what's called the school to prison pipeline in charter schools. So again, this is what is being pushed by black elites in the black middle class as the solution to black education.
Yeah. All right. Forrest, let's watch that clip.
Yeah, hold on.
Once there was no longer any resistance, and clearly when Mr. Floyd was no longer responsive and even motionless, to continue to apply that level of force to a person proned out, handcuffed behind their back, that in no way, shape, or form is anything that is by policy, is not part of our training, and it is certainly not part of our ethics or our values.
I'd like to show you what's been received as Exhibit 17. To ask you, officer, as you look at Exhibit 17, is this a trained technique that's by the Minneapolis Police Department when you were overseeing the training unit?
It is not.
And why not?
Well, use of force according to policy has to be, consistent with MPD training. And what we train are neck restraints, the conscious and unconscious neck restraint. So per policy, a neck restraint is compressing one or both sides of the neck using an arm or leg. But what we train is using one arm or two arm to do a neck restraint.
And how does this differ?
I don't know what kind of improvised position that is. So that's not what we train.
I was watching this. There's a really good documentary called "Let It All Burn," and it talks about the LA riots. But it gives you a 10-year span. Starts from '82, and then of course ends in the riots. And it has actual police officers in it that were involved in the riots and that had been police officers for some time. And they definitely ran the spectrum. Some guys really fucking hated Daryl Gates and walked away from the force, and other people were kind of true blue through and through. And when they talk about the training and the chokehold, and how when they had to ban the chokehold because they were killing people, one of the reasons why they were putting the chokehold on people was because they felt that these people were doing PCP. And when we go back to the James Mincy Jr. is the gentleman's name. You can look up his case. It's actually a very interesting case, a very sad story of a young man died unfortunately too soon. He had a cracked windshield. Again, policing poverty. He had a cracked windshield. He got pulled over by a cop. He got given a ticket for the windshield. As he drives off home, another set of police officers try to pull him over for the same cracked windshield. He panics, tries to get home as fast as possible. The cops go, he's on PCP, put him in that carotid, and he dies. And then again, they have to get rid of it. Then they get they have a name for it, but those metal billy clubs, those batons, and they're taught to break bones because you're constantly in fear of this drugged out guy. And when you hear these same cops talk about Rodney King, they're like, well, he was on PCP, which he was not.
Yeah.
So,
of course, the idea is that, PCP like just turns you into like one of the X-Men or something, which is not actually the case.
But lots of people believe it. I mean, that's still pushed as like a, like angel dust somehow gives you like the strength of a million men. And like, I don't know. Anytime I've ever heard I've heard plenty of people make jokes like and use that as a punchline to it. Like,
is that what was in U.S. Agent's super soldier serum, angel dust? Is that why? Yeah.
But yeah, one of the reasons showed that is that it is interesting that I think and I want to be careful about how I put this, because it's not like, I mean, clearly. Derek Chauvin, is as guilty as anybody possibly could be. I mean, he choked somebody to death on camera while they were like clearly powerless and begging for their life and, talking about their mom and stuff like that. So, the guy was clearly guilty. So I don't want to make this sound like some sort of like bullshit right-wing talking point about like they were just pacifying the mob or whatever, not the case. But it is also interesting to see the cops throw him under the bus there.
Yeah, that's why I clipped that for this that exact point. Like
because I think that is a strategy, right? Like normally they close ranks behind their own when stuff like this happens, and I think that they've got into the point where they think, okay, maybe
for higher profile cases they'll throw people under the bus. I mean, again,
they threw him under the bus because the state realizes the potential for urban rebellions and destruction of property and capital is so great that they would rather sacrifice him than have cities all over the country burn. Just like it was cities all over the country burning that made sure this cop was put in prison, not Keith Ellison. Not that I'm saying that that's a good thing, but I'm just saying sometimes.
I mean, Chauvin clearly didn't get the message that there was anything like that going on because he seems fucking shocked that could happen to him, which kind of says a lot about the police mindset, I guess, going into something like this, even with everybody kind of
he knew that people were filming him while he killed somebody, and he was shocked that that he is going to be criminally punished for, and that certainly tells you everything. But also, yeah, I think what Pascal is is saying is right, and I think it goes back to the discussion that we were having about the structural role of policing under capitalism and what can and can't be solved with different personnel, because the strategy here is to say, look, okay, so this guy's a bad apple, but but the police are fine, right? Like, so if you lock him up, problem solved.
Yeah, well, it's he's a bad apple, but look, like his chief is sitting on the stand, or you know what I mean, like sitting up there telling, like admitting that what he did was wrong. Like that's not a blue wall of silence. Like, look, the person that trained him sitting there, saying that he did something wrong. Like that's not a blue wall of silence. Like, so like
nobody wants that level of bad press, man. Again, go back and watch the footage of Daryl Gates turn on those cops quickly. We never train people to do that. That was excessive force.
Police are agents of the state. All right. The state realizes that rebellions and riots in the wake of a Chauvin acquittal would have been disastrous, particularly in the face of a Biden administration that's supposed to be playing huggy, kissy with Black Lives Matter and, concerned with all the issues and affairs of Black people today because, Joe Biden promised that, like, you had my back and I'll have yours. So,
But that would be the third or fourth one? Didn't they blow up over?
Sorry, Pascal, can you say that one more time?
Joe Biden in his presidential acceptance speech, he said, "The Black community had my back, and I'll have theirs."
Okay, sorry, I just need to hear that. Jason, what you said?
Not much now. Fucking Pascal's Joe Biden. But Minnesota, I thought that didn't they blow up over Philando Castile? Didn't they get a little violent over Philando Castile? And that happened a few years ago. You got George Floyd. They can't afford to have it happen. The kid that got killed 30 miles away as we're watching the George Floyd trial.
Has anyone inquired why Nancy Pelosi made a statement about a state criminal case in Minnesota? Has anyone inquired why Maxine Waters went out and publicly said that y'all better be aggressive and started basically stating that people don't stand for it? And listen, part of the left flank of capital of the ruling class, the Democratic Party, is playing on the Great Awakening's racial grievance discourse popularity to validate the functionality of the Democratic Party as the left flank of capital and more able to govern in the rise of reactionary nationalism coming with Trump, because they realized in the last 50 years, the 50-year counter-revolution, that the Democratic Party can arguably be laid to blame for worse policies for poor and working class Black people than Republicans. And they are basically scared that if they don't give some form of concessions, whether it's fatback and biscuits to the Black political class or acting like they care about the Black people in prison that they help facilitate put there, or the cops killing Black people who they actually armed with their policies when they gave them militarized weaponry through Democratic presidents and administrations, that they're going to play this huggy kissy with the Negro in order to make it seem like they actually give a damn.
Did you see Karen Bass behind her? Karen Bass looked like she wanted to snatch her fucking heart out as she was saying that shit. And then the Raiders didn't get any better. The Raiders actually made their whole Twitter say, "I can't breathe."
Yeah, of course. Nancy Pelosi and her. Oh yeah, here we go. Yep.
Oh, look. Okay, watch Karen Bass behind her. Watch this. Just look to the eyes through the
Thank
mask.
you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice, for being there to call out to your mom. How heartbreaking was that? Call out for your mom. I can't breathe. But because of you, and because of thousands, millions of people around the world who came out for justice, your name will always be synonymous with justice.
Yeah, that sure was nice of George Floyd to
George Floyd died to prove that a system that incarcerates and renders black men more to prison and actually the death penalty is just because he was killed by a cop.
Yeah.
So in other words, Nancy Pelosi is saying that George Floyd being murdered has validated a system that disproportionately crushes people like George Floyd to powder.
Yeah, well, he was in arranging it so that cop could step on his neck until he died, which was very
Jesus moment, man.
Yeah, very generous of him, right? That he did, that he decided to do that. But that's okay though, because he was doing that so that justice could be served by the cop who killed him, going to prison. Assuming, by the way, that Maxine Waters didn't fuck up the conviction, and get it, voided on appeal.
But you notice how Pelosi is tacitly admitting that the riots in the street is what got the acquittal. The millions of people a lot of the people were burning stuff down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, even from a neoliberal centrist perspective, it might be time to get a less senile speaker. But what are you saying, Jason?
You know what's really sad? I was talking to a friend on Facebook who works as a counselor. She actually is a mental health counselor, and she had said something that a lot of people in the industry say, which is, because George Floyd's a common character that we deal with, and she was like, if he doesn't get killed, no one talks about that dude. Or a third of the problems that go on in that community. And I'm not saying he sacrificed his life. I definitely know he wasn't going to the liquor store to do that shit. But there is something to be said about the fact that there's so many people that don't die at the knee of law enforcement. Like, you don't have to die at the knee of law enforcement for us to really examine the policing of poverty. And I'm just going to keep saying it because I believe it's a legitimate beef that people should be having, instead of trying to find nicer ways to police poverty, gunless ways to do it. We need to just stop policing poverty.
How about we stop poverty? How about we stop poverty?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Sure. If you come up with ways that you could, make the policing of it less brutal, then I'm for that. But basically the only solution, the only actually effective solution to it is to do something about poverty itself. Otherwise, you might have softer and rougher versions of it, but this is basically what you're going to see. And before we finish up, I just want to touch on some of the points that Pascal has made before about how it is that we process these things and talk about them and sort of focus on these spectacular incidents. And I know like a phrase that you've used in talking about this before is the politics of containment.
Yeah, the politics of containment, which when we had Adolph Reed on the show, I actually asked him if he believed black politics was a politics of containment. And he said, yeah, I think it is. But I think the containment is basically done, in that what that basically means is that the political aspirations and thoughts and opinions of black people are corralled into an illusory notion of one unified body that can be controlled by a tier of elites who are black but act at the behest of the ruling class and use their racial identity and their racial kind of authenticity to negotiate for their personal benefit, while basically playing on the hot button emotional issues and policy issues that they feign concern over the black community. So that, I didn't watch the George Floyd trial because I refused to have myself emotionally triggered by a media spectacle that it was going to be used to have me corral my emotions to say, look, all of the black people feel this and all of the black people want that, because it forces me to surrender the response to this phenomenon to a bunch of parasitic elites who are only doing the bidding of the ruling class to basically socially control poor and working class Black people particularly and maintain their class position, while denying the fact that some Black people might say that, hey, what exactly is the reason why there was no investigation of Chauvin's prior interactions with people and the number of complaints that got his ticket pulled as a cop before, instead of just talking about what he did to George Floyd? How come this guy was even on the force or allowed to be on the force in the first place? He had quite a few numbers of complaints or asking other questions about the role of political elites and how this is being negotiated, or a variety of questions. But the point is that surrendering to this spectacle facilitates the way in which Black politics and race politics becomes a kabuki theater between Black liberals or conservatives who can sit around talking about, well, you see, the problem is the culture, the problem is the people, the problem is this, without actually talking about the political economy and how it renders working class and poor Black people who are disproportionately affected by this kind of police action and poverty and crime in their communities, while middle class Negroes cash checks and buy houses in California and do commercials for Cadillac. Screaming,
leave me out of this.
Well, I mean, Adolph Reed goes into, I like how he puts it in class notes where he's talking about, like almost as like a language translator, like Black leaders as like almost
racial ventriloquist.
Like the fear that even white leftists have, that they don't understand how to speak to Black people or anybody different than them. You know what I mean? So they need, it's almost like the language is ciphered through these leaders who want to keep their own status as an elite, like just by definition. It's
what's that essay? The what are the drums saying, Cornell? What are the
drums saying? Booker. The curse of community. There's a whole. Some people, it's called brokerage politics. I call it racial ventriloquism. Some people call it cartel politics, or there's another word for it as well. But it's basically a way in which you have race management. In other words, one of the reasons why I use the word politics of containment is because it allows Black people collectively to be managed, race management at the behest of Black elites for the ruling class.
Mm-hmm.
This is a paradigm that goes back over 100 years in the Black community. Undemocratically chosen spokesmanship. And lots of Black people think, oh, this is wonderful. It's part of the main reason why Black politics facilitates things.
Oh, see, Deep State got him. And you know what sucks? He just got a new Wi-Fi thing. Hey, Deep State got you.
Yeah,
Deep State got your Wi-Fi.
All politics are really management at this point. Like, I mean, we talk about that constantly with like the PMC, but I mean.
Well, I want to, before we go, I definitely want to thank Ben and Forrest for having us on and being able to have this conversation to this level. When we agreed to come on and do it, we weren't going to sit here and break down the trial and break down knees to the neck in 9 minutes and all that other stuff. We're definitely going to get into a much larger discussion about the causes of these problems. So thank you for letting us come on and talk a little.
Yeah, I mean, I also don't want, I think that, that you can be topical to a point, but I also think that there are, there's a level of detail that, you can get 100 places tonight or yesterday. But what you, I think, maybe don't get enough places is what you and Pascal were talking about tonight. Which should be the which should be the larger discussion. Because even if like so much of the way that we process this stuff, I think, it goes back to, Mark Fisher and, capitalist realism, just the way that things are is, like, you don't have to love it, but, you accept it as the only way that things could basically possibly be, and everything happens within that prism. So, So you end up having these discussions about whether you can replace cops with social workers, or whether you can or whether you have unarmed cops, or you get rid of you get rid of cops, and you have and I don't know, whatever, you have your community militia or whatever. I'm not averse to having those discussions, but I also think that even when people who are having them, oftentimes even when the people who are having discussions all think of themselves as radical leftists, there is this like just bone deep capitalist realism informing the whole thing, which is that you're not really talking about why the hammer is coming down. You're really talking about like whether we could replace part of the hammer, or whether we can have a different kind of hammer, or what, or whether you can like rubber coat it or something. And you're not really talking about how you could have a situation where it's not coming down at all, and what you need to do that.
While the people throwing down the hammer are very much thinking about how to throw the hammer down most effectively. You know what I mean? Like, so that's kind of on the same level. Like they're very clearly thinking about the hammer. Like Biden has spent his life thinking about how to build the most damaging and effective hammer that he possibly.
And he spent a lot of time throwing that motherfucker down too.
Yeah.
It's when you look at how people called for tougher restrictions, called for more police, especially in the 90s. We don't get here in a vacuum. And we've done a show, me, Teray, Pascal, and Cedric, where we kind of break down these movies from the 90s, like Boys in the Hood, which to me is a commercial for the 94 crime bill. It doesn't really address the problems of what caused all this shit. It just exists in this vacuum of bad acting Negroes that need to pull their pants up and go to college.
Super predators.
We went to the theaters to see super predators en masse.
Well, Ben, I wanted to say that I wanted, in terms of inviting us here, I know you weren't trying to play the black left ventriloquist game. Is like, who are the only two black guys we can see to talk about the Chauvin trial? Let's get Jason, because I want to make it clear, because there are people who will accuse us and say, well, aren't you guys playing the ventriloquist role on the black left for being invited? I said, actually, my job here is to collapse that whole paradigm and to demonstrate why it's ridiculous and nonsensical, and to illustrate how the utility of that is utilized by traditional corporate media to stop the ability of people who are black and white, like ourselves, having actual conversations about how political economy of capitalism facilitates the destruction of all poor and working class people who are victimized by a system that basically is designed to make them redundant in this age of precarity. And that's why I think, I don't mean to speak for Jason, I think that's why we're here.
Oh, you can speak for me anytime, pretty boy.
Well, the reason that you're here is that I've heard both of you say things about this that I thought were insightful, and also I wanted to hear Pascal's Joe Biden impression.
So are we all watching the Oscars on Sunday? Is that the
play? Is Ben Burgess gonna do a show with us?
Yeah, sure.
Well, then, fucking, I need to talk to you, Forrest, and then I'll talk to you. Are you gonna be around tomorrow, your time, afternoon time?
Yeah, I'll be. I'll be around tomorrow.
You're hunkered down. Then I'll try to get a hold of you, and then we can try to figure out logistically how it will work. I don't know if Pascal is gonna be with us, because I know he's doing a show.
By the way, plug for This Is Revolution. Saturday we have the great Norman Finkelstein coming on, talking about cancel culture, author of the Holocaust industry. Tomorrow, This Is Revolution, we have Daniel Bessner talking about his review of Obama's book and maybe Obama's foreign policy. This is Revolution podcast on your YouTube's live streams.
Guys, I do have a book coming out if you want me to come on and talk about it.
Oh shit! Your book is it out?
No, it's out on May 1st.
Yes, come on the show.
What's the
we'll
book?
work out the dates. Come on the show. Let's talk about your book. The first time, I want to say this, the first time I talked to Ben Burgess, I wanted to talk to him about his first book, and he was like, "But I got this new book that I think you were finishing it up, weren't you? Or you had just finished it?"
Yeah, I think I'd finished a draft of it, but yeah, that's right. When you interviewed me the first time, it was allegedly about the first one, but we did end up talking a bunch about
about canceling comedians, and there's a great clip that I made of Ben talking about Dave Chappelle that I think is entertaining and fun to watch, and I made a killer beat underneath it. So
yeah, it's a good clip. But I should also say, actually, by the way, that Chappelle album that we were talking about has a there's a lot of stuff in there that's relevant to this conversation, not intentionally, because he's not he's not in the business of giving political analysis, but the stuff that he's doing as that he's using his grist for his comedy in there, like the kind of social breakdown he's talking about in Ohio. Where he lives, talking about the heroin epidemic and and all of that is very relevant to parts of this conversation tonight. But yeah, so that all sounds good. So yeah, I was being semi facetious about that, as the Norman Finkelstein thing reminded me, because the topic's similar, but I would obviously not say no to that invitation. But
I had never talked to the guy. I recently had to talk with him on the phone about coming on the show, and he's intense.
Yeah, fair enough.
Damn, the Daily Beast addendum to that article we did the stream on about the dirtbag left when they had Jason and Pascal do it. It's going to be crazy.
Oh wow!
No, there was. So we did a stream about there was this article that came out in the Daily Beast.
The road. Yeah.
And somehow like they use the Holocaust denier smear, which if you listen, they use this TrueAnon interview, which if you listen to the 3-hour interview, he's talking in depth about like how much it hurt him that someone whose family had died in the Holocaust like would be smeared that way. Like he's talking in depth about like everything with Alan Dershowitz and like how that was used to try to like tank his career. Like really, really like vulnerable, emotional stuff. And whatever the guy writing that fucking article just goes, Holocaust denier Norman Finkelstein.
Wow.
And, yeah, that's another reason why he wanted to talk to
his parents were actually victims of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure he knows it happened.
The rest of I think the rest of his family. I think his parents were the two
grandparents. I think his grandparents got killed.
But look, everybody, like his like cousins, aunts, uncle, like I think everybody was killed in the Holocaust. His family, I think his parents made it through. And then that kind of like fully like fleshed out, I guess, his politics. I don't know. So yeah, it's abhorrent to, and it was because of the Zionism debate with Alan Dershowitz, where he basically said, there's a bunch of factual errors in your book, and he's like, I don't think you should even be a professor, which is objectively the right position. Like Alan Dershowitz should definitely not be around like younger people of any.
I was just going to bring that up. I don't want to say anything, especially about somebody as litigation happy as Alan Dershowitz. But I'll just.
My views are not the views of my employers.
Yeah, exactly. I will say this much though, that just before Jeffrey Epstein, whatever happened there happened. That when it seemed like he was going to have to, that like there might be a trial where Epstein would be testifying and stuff. Dershowitz's demeanor as he was doing like frantic denials and stuff on TV. He did anything when he was on Pedophile Island. Dershowitz Dershowitz seemed kind of sweaty and agitated about it, and conclude from that what you will.
Ben,
But
whatever happened there? I recently thought of the Phil Leotardo karma.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever happened there? Your animal cousin Tony Blundetto.
Yeah, is one of the things that made me happiest when I was co-hosting Dead Pundits when we interviewed Adolph Reed, and he dropped some Sopranos reference in the middle of it, and I had to stop the whole thing to like, okay, back up. Are you a fan? Because this is, want to have that conversation. But in any case, yep, this is the book Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, a critique of the contemporary left. It's basically about all of the ways that the left as it exists now is not well suited to achieving its stated goals.
It's a good book. I've been thinking about it since I read it last weekend. It's a really good book.
I'm going to pick it up.
In any case, so yeah, I guess you can see at least me and Jason Forrest on Sunday talking about the Oscars. And actually before that, we will have with patrons, we will try to sneak in another Discord movie night. I guess it would have to be either Friday or Saturday, probably, maybe Thursday. I don't know, but
what
one of those.
About watching.
So yeah, have to figure that out. Either Nomadland or Da 5 Bloods, I think. But anyway, it'll be one or the other of those. So that will be yeah. So I think we're gonna do.
I gave you my take on Da 5 Bloods. I don't know if you've seen that, Pascal. The Spike Lee's movie.
Nah, man, I wasn't gonna watch that propaganda.
Delroy Lindo gave a fantastic performance. I wasn't a big fan of the movie, but Delroy Lindo crushed it.
Fair enough.
The late Chadwick Boseman also did it. For the short time he was in the movie, he did a great job as well.
Yeah, I think that it also plays into that narrative that we were talking about on Twitter earlier, which is like the redefining, I guess, of the Vietnam era and 1960.
That's why I'm not watching it.
Yeah,
you love Spike Lee, man. Stop. We're gonna watch More Better Blues when we hang up this phone.
That's the only movie he made that I really like.
Out of all of them, is Mo Better Blues?
Yeah, I like Mo Better Blues a lot.
More than School Days?
School Days is a really ridiculous attempt to try to talk about class and colorism.
But the musicals in School Days, Good or Bad Hair. See if I can.
It's funny. When I watched it when I was in college and in a black fraternity, I found it interesting because I felt that he highlighted exactly the kind of things that made people that were basically made these organizations worse want to become members of them because he popularized it in some ways. But
the first step show I ever saw was in School Days.
Yeah, but
I've been enforced so quiet because the motherfuckers ain't seen School Days.
Yeah, that is actually a good idea. Kale is the best kind of movie nerd. A couple of weeks ago, he gave us a terrifyingly thorough rundown of The Shining. But
I think Sundays are Sundays are the day that he's trying to do the Lord's rest or whatever.
Whatever.
I remember texting him on Sunday, and he was like, "This is my day" or something.
All right,
but I bet he would. I bet.
I'll try to hit him up. We'll see what happens.
Well, anyway, so yeah, that sounds good. We'll say that there are probably going to be a couple of more live streams over the course of the next week and a half. Season 2 officially starts on Monday. The first episode is on Monday, the 3rd. although the day before it, we're restarting the Sunday night debate breakdowns. So we're going to watch Zizek Peterson because we just passed the 2-year anniversary. And I just found out that Slavoj Žižek is going to be joining us for the first part of that discussion. So,
no shit.
Yep. So, so should be really good.
I gotta come along as producer and do the whole stop start thing just so I can see Zizek again. I mean, I met him when he did, I think briefly when he did the TMBS panel with Cornel West, but but
yeah.
I still, I don't know.
So anyway, thank you guys for coming on. I was almost gonna make some like really bad joke about like the basically play the character of being like the woke neoliberal creep who's talking about difficult conversations. It's like thank you so much for the difficult conversations. But
today's episode of Give Them an Argument is sponsored by Wells Fargo.
Exactly.
Don't we all wish, right? Some of that right wing Candace Owens money.
Yeah.
No, it was the DeRay
McKesson.
Like he had a talks like it was like Black Lives Matter something, and it was like sponsored by Wells Fargo. It was like,
Kale Brooks just commented. Kale Brooks, we're gonna hit you up on the social medias. You just signed up for it. Now you got to take Pascal's place.
Yeah, fair enough. Oh, speaking of Kale, I should say that on Saturday on the Jacobin Weekends show, I'm going to be talking about the book there. So check that out at 1:00 on Saturday on the Jacobin YouTube channel. But in any case, thank you guys so much for coming on. This was really good as always. I will see most of the people who are here on Sunday. I guess maybe earlier if I can rope Jason into doing the Discord movie night, and I will see everybody who watch this for the next live stream, which will definitely be by Monday or so, I think. So sounds good. Left is best.